Hey everybody, this is Landry with EVOQ Bike, and I'm here today with a very special guest. This is Hari Mix, who is the founder of Calorify, which I came across listening to Run Free podcast, which is actually running podcast, and I was really intrigued with what I heard. I've always been really interested in sports nutrition and the fueling aspect, and I was actually having some issues with losing weight at the time. And so just the time that I came across this was perfect timing. And so I had to reach out to Hari and test out Calorify and get him on the podcast. So I think this is something that everybody could really benefit from. And this is kind of cutting edge, something that nobody has really had access to until now, really. And the things that you can gain from this are going to be such a game changer for your training and your cycling. So we also have a discount code. The code is EVOQ or the code is EVOQ. So at checkout, you can get $100 off of your Calorify test. So just type in EVOQ when you check out, and you'll get $100 off. So Hari, why don't you take it from here and tell us about yourself and kind of what Calorify is and how it can help us as cyclists.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to talk with people like you. I think, like you said, we are bringing something to market that is cutting edge and is revolutionary. It's also bedrock science. It's been around for a long time, so I'm happy to share about the whole history of this. But I think where you come in and where your community comes in is that you're really on the forefront of applying this to improve yourself in some way. Maybe that's fueling better, maybe that's improving your body composition, maybe that's preventing overuse injuries or any type of other overtraining syndromes that are out there, things like Red S. So I think it's a really neat conversation, and I know that a lot of the topics that you have planned are really on the frontier of what science is even, measured to date. And so I can try to bring, you all up to speed in terms of where things are. But I think that the frontier is really in the application of this information to improve, quality of life and to improve performance. So I come at this from an interesting background. I have a background as an elite distance runner. I was an All-American at Stanford, and I was ranked in the top 30 in the US for a few years in a couple of events like the 5K and 10K. And I've gone on to become a top high altitude climber, which really led me into metabolism because it's so demanding. So climbing the world's highest mountains, there are 14 8,000 meter peaks in the world. That's 5 miles high, 26,200 feet or so, and trying to do them without oxygen. And it's so demanding metabolically. Your metabolic rate is incredibly high, but you can't eat very much. And so weight loss is a huge part of it. And in particular, bad weight loss, losing a lot of lean body mass. And it was through some of these kind of catastrophic expeditions. I was on Lhotse, which is connected to Mount Everest in 2013. It's the fourth highest mountain in the world. And I lost 25 pounds off of an already pretty lean distance runner frame. And it was pretty disastrous. And so I really started to get interested in not only exercise metabolism, which I'm sure you and your audience are all up to speed on, aerobic threshold, lactate threshold, VO2 max, all these kind of concepts, and carbs versus fats, and how many carbs can you get in per hour, and all these kind of topics, but also taking a really big step back and saying, over the course of a week or over the course of a month, what is my energy budget? So how big is my caloric paycheck? Can I increase my paycheck, right? Can I fuel better or more? I think as elite endurance athletes, we're oftentimes trying to get away with less. How light can I be? How can I make my watts per kilo higher by reducing the kilos part? So how much can I fuel is a very interesting way of looking at it. And then how much am I burning, which nobody knows outside of this method that we've commercialized. Every device that's out there, any type of wearable device, isn't accurately measuring. It's actually not measuring at all those calories. It's just using some algorithm with your age, height, weight, and sex, and it throws in a little bit of accelerometry, a little bit of heart rate, and you get a guess that's about 50 to 55% accurate. So if you're a cyclist, that means that you can be off by a couple thousand calories a day with one of those wearables. So not really good enough to be in the performance game at all. You're just guessing. And so there's kind of this combination of guessing how much food you're putting in your body, because calorie counting is brutal. For those of you who've tried, it's incredibly tedious, and it's very hard to be accurate. Even if you're using a food scale, it's really hard to get that right. And then nobody knows anything on the energy out, the calories outside of it. So we look at this like a personal finance app, and how much am I putting in my body? How much am I burning? And then we can really fine tune it from there. What are all the ways that I'm spending my energy budget? And can I optimize my energy spending in a way that enhances performance? And so that's where we kind of come in. So what I combined with my athletic background is my kind of professional background. I have a bachelor's and PhD from Stanford, and I was a professor at Santa Clara University for 7 years, but I guess before founding the company. And really my academic expertise is in making these cutting edge measurements of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes. So isotopes are forms of elements that have a different mass. That is to say, they have a different number of neutrons in the nucleus. A lot of times people think of isotopes, they think of radioactivity. We're not talking about radioactivity at all today. Our product has no radiation involved in it whatsoever. It's just a different way of, it's just a different form of an element, and it allows us to trace it through your body and to trace your metabolism, to quantify your metabolism. So I basically combined my scientific, ability to make this measurement with my passion for endurance, to come up with Calorify. And what we've done is we've commercialized what's called doubly labeled water. It's been around since 1949. It was first done on mice in 1955. And it took a few decades to be done on humans because it's so expensive and tedious and cumbersome. So it's first done on humans in 1982. And it's been the gold standard way of measuring how many calories you're eating or burning in a free living environment. So there's really only one other way of doing this, and that's going inpatient into a hospital, into what's called a metabolic chamber or metabolic ward. So you have to live in an airtight room for days on end. And that's very accurate. Problem is, it's not the real world. You're not eating your normal diet. You're not doing your normal training. And so it's great if you just want to run a pure lab experiment between two different groups of people, but it's not really useful at all if you're trying to use that information to improve your life or improve your performance. And that's where we come in. So it's a really simple process. Order a kit online, get a kit in 2 days. And what it's going to have in it is a sip of this fingerprinted water. We've labeled the hydrogens and oxygens on those water molecules. There's nothing in the water. And you take a sip of this water, you've done the process, you take a sip of this water, you collect 3 urine samples over the course of a week, mail them back, and you get your results within 24 hours of them being received in the lab. So I'm sure we're going to go through what all you get off it, but you get a tremendous suite of information, not only metabolism, but also body composition, also activity level, also hydration. And I think the richness that comes off this test is just being started to be used. And we are just about to start using it with a world tour team. We're really excited about what, the top pros look like metabolically as well.
Yeah, that'll be super interesting. I think we've just had so many more insights into nutrition the last 10 years, especially. I remember when I
Yeah.
first got into cycling, even 10 years ago, we didn't know half as much as we know now. And so even just, I think this is so exciting and groundbreaking. And I think so much amazing things are just going to come from this. And I think it's really going to catch on with even world tour teams eventually, to the point where everybody's doing this, because
Yeah.
even 10 years ago, I don't think hardly any world tour teams had nutritionists. And
Right.
now every team does, and everybody has a set regimented nutrition regime that they're on. And so this is something that I think everybody would want to use. And I'm
Yeah, and they
excited to see
want
what comes from it.
exclusivity too, because they know it is an edge. One of the sports scientists for one of these world tour teams basically said the energy budget is potentially the number one contributor to performance. If you think about what you're doing with your metabolism, not just in a race, not just in training, but over the course of months or years, basically how much can you fuel and how much can you train? And I think that is the ultimate ceiling on it, is your metabolism. I know there are other ceilings in your body too, but I think especially for cycling, low impact sport, I think that metabolism is potentially your personal ceiling.
Totally. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize this. I didn't realize this when I first started cycling, but when you wake up the next morning after you did a big ride and you feel really tired and depleted, that's just because you didn't eat enough or you didn't fuel enough, or just because you burnt so many calories that you weren't able to replace what you burnt. And it took me so long to understand the connection between what I was eating and how well I was able to recover. And I think you even said this on the Run Free podcast, but if we could just fuel unlimited amounts and absorb everything we ate, everybody would be out doing
Yeah,
10-hour rides every day. And
of
that's,
course.
but the ceiling is really and truly how much we can fuel and absorb, because you can only, you can't drive your car unless you put the fuel in. So
That's kind of how we know there is a limit, because we've measured riders in the Tour, which is the limit for what you can achieve in a 3-week period. There's nobody that's ever have been measured to burn more calories in a 23-day period than Tour de France riders. And if they could do double that, then they would just win every race. Whoever won the Tour would just win every single race for the whole season, right? It just doesn't work that way. So there
totally.
is a finite amount of nutrition that you can absorb in your gut, even if you force feed more. And it's probably pretty hard if you're riding that hard, that many hours per day, to do that anyhow. And actually, not only that, the Tour is the world record for energy intake as well. So the most that somebody's ever been fed is, over a 3-week period is a group of Tour riders.
Yeah. So kind of bouncing off of that, what is this PAL concept? So this physical activity, um,
Level.
can you go into that, and what does
Yeah.
PAL mean, and kind of what are the implications of that for our training?
Right. So we all have 37 trillion cells in our body. They all take energy. Unsurprisingly, the bigger the person, especially when I'm talking about lean body mass, I'm not talking about fat mass. Fat mass doesn't take energy to fuel, very little. The bigger the person is, the more calories they're going to burn, right? Not a surprise. And so what physical activity level is it's how many calories do you burn relative to your body size? So if you take the total number of calories you burn, let's say you're burning 4,000 calories a day, and you divide it by your basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy that it takes just to keep the lights on. So if you're going to be lying motionless on a table at complete rest, so you still need to regulate your core body temperature, you still need to breathe, you still need to run your brain, your liver, etc. You need to pump blood. So that takes a certain number of calories, and that's directly related to your lean body mass. So the more lean body mass you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate. So one way to boost your metabolism is to add lean body mass, like put muscle on, and you're gonna increase your metabolism that way. The other way to do it is to increase your activity level, as we call it. And so again, that's that ratio of how much I'm burning total divided by how much I burn at baseline. So let's say that person's basal metabolic rate is 2,000 calories a day. That means they're a pretty big person. 4,000 divided by 2,000 is 2. So their physical activity level is 2. Well, let's put these numbers in context. 1.5, 1.6, pretty average. Pretty, lightly to moderately active person might be doing something active, a couple or a few times a week. 1.4 or lower, I would say, is pretty sedentary. Just not a lot of physical activity. By the time you get to like 1.8, that person is making exercise a part of their lifestyle for sure. And then I think a lot of your audience is going to be in that like 1.8 to 2.0 to even higher than 2.0, all the way up to like maybe 2.5. So 2.0 to 2.5 are pretty serious athletes. I would say that they tend to be training probably at least 10 hours a week at a decent intensity, maybe even higher. And then you start getting into this question mark. So on the On the very low side, how low can your physical activity level go? It's pretty hard to get below 1.1 because even if you need to lift the channel changer or talk, you're burning calories, right? So it's very hard to get any closer to your basal metabolic rate than that to just simply be alive. And then on the high side, you can greatly exceed this to 2.5 or whatever, but you can't stay up there. So the highest physical activity levels have been in, I can show you actually the world record for burning calories currently measured. Somebody burned like 16,000 calories during the Western States 100-mile endurance run, okay, for 25 hours running straight. An Ironman is about 9.5 times your BMR. But again, you're not doing the Ironman the next day and the day after that and the day after that. Actually, there is a dude who we measured that did 33 Ironmans in 33 consecutive days. So that's currently the world record for Ironmans. And then you go down, you get to the tour, and the tour is like 4.9. But again, so they're burning 4 or 5 times their basal metabolic rate, which is to say they're probably burning 7,000 or 8,000 calories a day for riders of that size. But they're pretty destroyed after that stage race, right? They probably lost weight. They probably lost muscle. They lost bone density. Their hormones are in the gutter. And so the kind of question that comes up is not how much can you temporarily exceed it by, and there's tons of studies on that. People running the Coconino 250-mile race. There's a study of a guy who just ran from Utah to Mexico, which is about 800 miles. He was doing about 65 miles a day. So we have all that data from like what those type of duration extreme events are, and I would put the tour in that category. I think the real question that I have is how high can you sustain? So like where can you sustainably train without getting sick, without getting injured, and without losing weight? I mean, losing weight to get to the right body composition, okay. But losing weight if you're already an elite athlete and you're already training a lot, not okay. So that kind of converges on around 2.5. Now, we probably haven't measured the Usain Bolt of metabolism. There's probably freaks out there that haven't been measured. And so I really have a kind of a question, a deep question that nobody has answered yet, which is, okay, is the reason that pick the most freakish rider you can name, or pick like Eliud Kipchoge in the marathon or something like that, is the reason that they've been so consistent and so injury-free and so unbelievably good for decades because they have their ceiling is 2.8? We know it's not 4. Like we said earlier, if it were 4, then they would just run 200 miles a week and win every race, right? It's not happening. Nobody's doing that. Or maybe they don't have a higher ceiling. Maybe their ceiling still is 2.5, just like everybody else around us. But maybe they're really, really efficient at their energy budget within there. And they're spending a great slice of their energy on their training. And then they're doing an incredible job of like recovery and gut health and sleep and all those other things to minimize the useless energy spending and really maximize the energy spending on recovery, essentially. And nobody knows because we haven't measured enough elite athletes, but we're working on it at Calorify. So about 20 to 25% of the people we work with are pro athletes or Olympians.
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to see what kind of insights you can gain from when you start working with this World Tour team to see how the top riders in the world can train and how they fuel and potentially if they can sustain above that limit for an extended period of time. And
right.
It also kind of raises the interesting question of, say, Tadej Pogacar or someone like that, or Roglic, guys who are really good at grand tours and just win basically everything. Or even we look at certain people who can just sustain really high workloads. I remember reading Nils van der Poel, who was a speed skater. He chronicled his training. I don't know if you read that, but he was doing insane volume on the bike,
right.
like 50-hour weeks or something like that. And you just wonder, is there something there that allows them to fuel more and absorb more, to train harder and make more adaptations? Because ultimately, your work is limited by how much fuel you can take on, but also even your ability to adapt. If you don't have enough fuel to replace what you're putting out, your body's not going to adapt from that training and it's not going to be doing you any good. So, you kind of alluded to this, but if somebody goes over that limit or doesn't refuel enough and there's a mismatch between their expenditure and their intake, what are the negative impacts of that? Like, why is that a problem for athletes that we should care about?
Yeah, it's kind of like the law of gravity. I mean, you can go up, but what goes up must kind of come down at some point. And so if you cannot get that number of calories, day in and day out into your system, then basically your body's either going to drop you back below that limit, let's call it 2.5 for sake of argument now, or you're going to lose weight. There's no other way around it. It's just basic physics, right? So if you're in an energy deficit, you're going to lose weight. So there's the weight loss option, and then in the ways that your body can drop you back down, it would be through an overuse injury or through a sickness. And we've seen this in a lot of athletes, is that when they tend to be living not just a tiny bit over 2.5, but like substantially over 2.5, like we've measured people in the threes, as high as 3.2, and then somebody actually as high as 3.7. That's when overuse injuries come up. And there's actually a curve that you can see the sustainability time horizon associated with that activity level. So for the tour, the time horizon on which you can sustain that amount of energy is the length of the tour. So those guys couldn't ride like 10 more stages at the same intensity. And so how long can you sustain a 3.5? And the answer is, or 3.2 is like 100 days. Okay. And so we've measured teams of athletes, pro athletes, some in the NBA and some in track and field. It's pretty interesting. So first takeaway is there's a huge amount of individual variability in how much they burn, even though they have the same lean body mass. So I'm not talking about huge people versus small people. I'm talking about physical activity level, again, relative to their body size, huge differences. And then when we rank people from highest to lowest physical activity level, what we see is the most injury prone to the least injury prone in order. And then we see the sustainability time horizon match up to the recurrence interval on which they get injured or sick. It's eerie how it kind of works. So I think that you can have a buildup, probably be in I've seen this in pro marathoners and Ironman triathletes, a buildup in the low threes, 3.05, 3.1. And then they're going to taper for their race. Then they're going to race, and then they're going to take time off. And that's probably okay. And maybe they're taking time off for the holidays or whatever else. And so I've actually seen some athletes that aren't necessarily injury prone doing that. And I would call that like strategic overreaching. And I bet that's okay. Also, they're probably losing a bit of weight during that time, and they're probably getting closer to that race weight. But you can't live at your race weight too easily, maybe without it affecting performance, right? So there's definitely that. And then when we start talking to the athletes about what's going on in their life, when we start breaking down their energy budget, we realize that a lot of this comes down to one component of your metabolism. It's called NEAT. So there's basically four major components of your metabolism. There's your basal metabolic rate, which I mentioned. So that's basically just like what it takes to stay alive, even if you're not moving at all. There's thermic effect of food, so the energy it takes to digest. Different foods take different amounts of energy to digest. So fat takes 0 to 3% of the energy in fat to digest, very efficient. Carbs is 5 to 10%. And protein is 20 to 30%. So if you eat 100 calories of protein, you're only going to absorb 70 to 80 calories of energy. The next one is exercise, and that's the one that everybody thinks about, and they ignore everything else, and they think it's only exercise is the only way to burn calories, and it's not true. What's left over is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So what about everything else that you do in your life outside of training? Let's say you're training 20 hours a week? What are you doing the rest of the 168 or whatever? And it turns out that a lot of things go into that category. We don't have the ability to really discriminate. And so this is this big bucket of like fidgeting, immune function, just stress and anxiety. We've seen high NEATs in people with anxiety disorders. We've seen high NEATs in people with autoimmune diseases, their immune system's overactive. We've seen high NEATs in people that have stress in their lives, like they started a new job or they were moving during test week. We've even seen it in a chemotherapy patient. Very high NEAT, equivalent to like an NBA player, but not actually training at that level, of course. So lots of things burn calories, and they all go into that bucket. And so when we look at the injury-prone athletes, they tend to have a pretty high energy expenditure elsewhere. And we look at the very, very durable athletes, they tend to be pretty low and pretty mellow and like pretty darn good at like just training and then chilling out and recovering and not having a whole lot else going on in their lives. And that's more possible for some people than others. We're working with a doctor right now who works 80 hours a week while doing powerlifting and Ironman training. And that's a lot of NEAT. It's like he was burning like 13 or 1,400 calories a day. It's because he's on his feet all day at the hospital and he's waking up at 4 a.m. to do his training. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it kind of brings up the point of one reason why professional riders are able to train more than amateurs is because they don't have to worry about anything else. And
Yeah.
I'm imagining what it would be like to have my job, and the only thing I have to worry about is my training, and just how much less stress there would be in the rest of your life, and that can really allow you to sustain that higher load. And I think that's one reason why you hear people talking a lot, especially professional cyclists, about how they always go to training camps and altitude camps. And part of that is for sure the benefits of altitude training, but
Yeah.
also because when they go to these camps, somebody's doing their laundry, somebody's doing their
Yep.
grocery shopping, they don't have to clean the bathroom, somebody's cooking their food. And so they can get that extra 10% out of their training to get into peak shape. And so I think that's just kind of something that you have to be aware of if you're really trying to get the most out of your performance, is how can you limit those other activities so you can use that extra energy for training something that's actually going to make you faster. And that's something that you can really gain from this metabolic testing, is to see how much am I spending on my training and how much am I spending on other activities that maybe I don't need to be worrying about. Maybe I
Yeah.
shouldn't go for that extra run because I feel like it, and maybe I should just focus on the cycling.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, so maybe your goal is to lower your PAL if you're an athlete while maintaining your training. Like most people, their goal should be to probably just boost their PAL a bit and move around a little bit more that week and actually get in more exercise. But if you're a pro athlete or if you're really trying to, maximize your performance, you probably want to lower your NEAT and therefore lower your PAL so that you have this bigger energy reserve to recover or to boost your training if you so wish. Exactly. So when we were looking at this pro track and field team, all these women were running 70 to 80 miles a week. They all had the same lean body mass, and the physical activity levels ranged from 2.1 to 3.2, which is to say like 1,100 calories different for them, which is a lot because they're not large women, right? So this is a really big amount. It's almost 1 times their BMR. It's over 1 times their BMR, right? It's a lot of energy. And it turns out that you're looking at the difference between an Olympic medalist who really hasn't had injury issues in the last decade and someone who gets injured twice a year.
yeah, totally. And so kind of bouncing off that, what will your body do if you're not getting in enough fueling? So we talk about relative energy deficit, something that's gained a lot of attention over the
Yeah.
last few years. So if somebody races the Tour de France, they're not, after that, they're going to recover. They're going to go below the limit and they're going to refuel and they're going to gain weight back and they're going to restore their body. But if somebody continues to sustain above that limit for a long period of time, your body will compensate
Yeah.
eventually, and your performance is going to go down. So, kind of what are some of the things that will happen to your body if you are training too hard above that limit or not refueling properly?
Yeah, so Red S is really gaining a lot of steam now, and it's gaining a lot of attention, which is a very good thing. It's very devastating. I've had multiple friends have it, and it takes you out way longer than a stress fracture or something like that would. It'll take you out for 6 or 12 months. So all kinds of hormonal problems, sex hormones, mental health suffers, bone density issues is a big one. So you get a lot of bone issues in runners, for example, femoral neck stress fractures, tibial stress fractures, sacral stress fractures in the foot, like things like the navicular and metatarsals and all that. Those are kind of classic like energy availability issues. Issues with immune function, and so being more susceptible to illness. And then I think just kind of the subjective experience of being an overtrained or underfueled athlete, motivation is going to suffer. Performance definitely suffers enormously. So it's something to really, really keep an eye on. And unfortunately, until now, you've had to basically just wait until symptoms occur in order to address it. And it's very, very hard in real time in your season to realize what's going on and change something fast enough to avoid this problem. So it's a little too late. And so the concept of energy availability is critical for overtraining syndrome and for Red S. So we've been talking a lot about PAL, physical activity level. That's the multiples of your basal metabolic rate that you burn. So it's much more about how much you're burning, and is the amount that I'm burning sustainable. Energy availability is a little bit more of a precise measurement about how much am I fueling? How much am I fueling for the training that I'm doing? So energy availability is defined as the amount of non-exercise calories I have left. And that's normalized to how many, per kilo of lean body mass. So how many non-exercise calories per kilo of lean body mass do I have left after all of my training to do everything else I need to do to be healthy? Good bone density, good mental health, good sex hormones, good immune function. If you're a woman, healthy menstrual cycle. So this is where women lose their period. And basically it's pretty well established in the literature that 30 calories or below per kilo of lean body mass is like clinically deficient, and you're like en route to Red S for sure. 30 to 45 is kind of a subclinical, kind of a gray area, might be affecting performance, might be affecting quality of life, but it is not like you might not get diagnosed with like overtraining at that time. And then 45 and above is pretty optimal. So to date, the only way of actually doing energy availability has been to ask athletes how much food they're eating. And unfortunately, athletes are probably no better than regular people. It's very, very hard to accurately measure what you're putting in your body. Even if you're using a food scale, nutrition labels can be off. It's very hard to truly measure everything you put in your mouth for a week and not forget anything. And so what we do is we quantitatively get at this. No subjective survey info required. So just take the doubly labeled water test, weigh in as regularly as you can, and give us your power meter data. And that's literally it. And we will actually, the only way on the market to actually quantify this number. And so you can see it coming, right? So if you are in the 40s or the 30s, you should know like, oh, okay, like I actually am a little energy limited. And then we flip over and look at the PAL, and we look at how much you're putting in your body. We're looking at how many calories you're eating, because we are quantifying that. And we're trying to say, can you eat more? If so, how much more can you eat? And so then we can add fuel. And if you're overtraining from a PAL side of perspective, if you're over 2.5, then the question, and you're under fueling in terms of how much you're eating, of course, because you can't sustain that. Then the question is, how much do I need to drop by in order to make this sustainable again, in order to make my energy availability go back up? And so we do all that math for you. We basically just make it clear, like, here's how much energy availability you have. here's your training sustainability. If you're overtraining or overreaching, I should say, then we'll tell you how long you can sustain that before you need to drop back. If you're under your personal metabolic ceiling, we'll tell you how much more room you have to eat and burn in order to maximize your training and your recovery.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is something that I really try to emphasize when I first start coaching an athlete is first and foremost, like one of the first things I mention is to make sure their nutrition is dialed. And if they wake up one morning or they have a few days in a row where they say, "Oh, I felt really tired. I didn't have a lot of energy," yada, yada, yada. Well, then I'm like, well, what did you eat? What did you eat on the bike? What did you eat the rest of the day? And then I'll oftentimes share with them an article that I've written or just some other resource to kind of just get their mind going with their fueling and just understanding the connection between what you're eating and your performance. Because especially with something like cycling, relative energy deficit is really common and it's not necessarily intentional. It's just because people don't realize how much they actually need to be eating and fueling. And
Yeah.
so something like Calorify is something that I would encourage all of my athletes to do just to see where they're at, to see, hey, how much do I actually need to fuel? And just knowing that early on is
Yeah.
going to help you to train so much better, recover so much faster, and accelerate your progress. And then kind of conversely to that, athletes who are trying to lose weight and they don't know why they're not losing weight. I mean, this can help kind of the other end of the spectrum of
Yeah.
knowing exactly how much do you actually need.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue. That's exactly where I was going to go next. So, like, we also understand that you might want to improve your body composition, but there's a way to do that that is extreme and aggressive and unsustainable, and going to be detrimental to performance. And there's a way to do that efficiently and safely. And we can help you identify that calorie surplus to build muscle without gaining too much excess fat, or the deficit to lose fat but not lose muscle. And we really want to take the emphasis off of weight, because when somebody says I want to lose weight, what they mean is I want to lose fat. So we can really put the emphasis on body composition and target what is that exact, say, let's take the weight loss example. Somebody wants to get to be leaner, increase their watts per kilo or whatever it is. We can put you into a very shallow calorie deficit, where if you tried without Calorify, you'd be guessing on both the calories inside and calories outside, and you're just going to miss. And what we can do is, with regular weigh-ins, you feed us that data and we can hone in on exactly where you need to be and give you really, really fine-tuned advice. And this is with the Calorify Pro products. So we have basically the basic EE labeled water test is kind of Calorify. Calorify Pro comes with the energy availability, the training sustainability, and this custom body weight and body composition planning, and like the personal consultation side of it. And yeah, that can really help. I think for a regular person that's not trying to train at the level that I think a lot of your clients and people in your community are, being in a 25% calorie deficit is totally fine. You know, that might be a 900 calorie deficit. They might be losing 1.7 pounds per week. That's fine. But if you're trying to do that while you're trying to do what you're asking them to do, it's going to be super, super aggressive, and they might run into energy availability issues or, or under fueling issues, right? And so we want to basically help them meet their body composition goal while also helping them achieve their goals on the bike.
Totally. And I mean, some athletes can benefit the most from just even trying to lose a little bit of extra weight, regardless of what their training is. So this is really low hanging fruit just to make those extra gains and get that extra 10%. I think,
Yeah, our biggest success story there is actually with an NBA player who was overtraining and underfueling and losing weight and was very injury prone. dramatically reduced the activity level in order to put him in a calorie surplus, the right calorie surplus, put on 13 pounds of muscle, and is now back healthy and dominating, right? So it is possible, like the math works. I think the reason that people get frustrated with calories or say this doesn't work for me, or look to other solutions like a particular type of diet or a particular supplement or whatever it is that they're not accurately measuring it. And so it's very easy to not believe in something when you have no quantitative view into it. And once you actually do have this quantitative view in your body, everything else kind of just starts to make a little bit more sense. And we can get at these body composition issues pretty easily and pretty accurately. We're not a shortcut. We're not a hack. There's no like secret sauce here. We're a test. We're a tool. You still have to do all the hard work, right? But we're like a GPS. Like, here's where you are. Here's your current metabolism. Here's your current body composition at DEXA level accuracy. So like professional level accuracy, but just in an at-home setting. And here's the most efficient way to aim for your goals. Here's the most efficient way for you to aim for your fueling or for your body composition or for your training volume, right? So these are like all the biggest questions. And then you all get the great job and the great task of like actually designing the implementation.
Right. Yeah, and I think that would be kind of a good time to segue into if we would be able to kind of discuss my results just to kind of give people
Yeah.
an idea of what this all looks like in practice and how me personally can apply this to use this for my training. Because I know for me, my goals are a little bit different from maybe what other people's goals are, but I was really intrigued to actually try your test, and I'm glad that I was
Yeah.
able to try it because I think that this is really going to help me with my training as well.
Yeah. So I've got them pulled up. I'm happy to share my screen, or if you want to just like kind of colloquially kind of go over it together, just conversationally, we can do it that way too.
Yeah, I mean, you could go ahead and pull it up if people are watching this on YouTube, and then we can just kind of describe what's going on.
Cool. So let's see here. First things first, you're burning 3,900 calories a day. And you're pretty darn weight stable. I mean, I think that if we were to continue your weigh-ins for a couple more weeks, maybe we'd see that you're actually completely weight stable, but it looks like you're in a very slight calorie surplus. During test week, you gained 0.3 pounds, according to all your weigh-in data. So looking pretty good, looking pretty athletic for somebody your size. If we skip right down to physical activity level, what we've been talking about, 2.47. So I think you're actually pretty naturally like honed in on a high sustainable training volume. I know you had been training more and losing some more weight earlier before our test. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say this week I was training actually a little bit less than I normally would, but I was trying to eat more just because I had been experiencing some weight loss. So I think that's actually kind of reflected in the little bit of a surplus as I was intentionally increasing my calories. Because once I got this test back, I realized that I was actually undershooting not how much I was eating necessarily, I just was burning more than I thought I was off off of the bike actually. So
Right,
and it really explained kind of the weight loss that I was experiencing. It was like, oh, this all makes sense now. So it
right.
was amazing to have to know exactly why was I losing weight and to know what I need to do to fix it rather than just trying to guess.
Right. And then based on this physical activity level and based on your calorie budget, I would say that you're eating about as much as you can. So you're definitely like trying hard in terms of fueling, which is a good thing. I think you
Mhm.
can probably exceed that over shorter periods of time, but I'm not sure day in and day out for an entire year that you could eat more than 4,000 calories without gaining weight, right?
Mhm.
You could gain weight and then you could eat more. That's you'll put on lean body mass and eat more.
Right.
Your complete energy budget breakdown is pretty interesting. So we took your power meter data. So you're exercising almost 1,500 calories a day this week. Your BMR is 1,577, which it kind of lines up with your lean body mass here of 121 pounds. And your thermic effective food, 642 calories in digestion. I kind of am guessing that you ate a decent amount of protein this week.
I don't know, probably pretty normal to what I normally eat,
Okay.
so maybe.
Okay. The thing that stood out to me about this is that this NEAT is extremely low. Um, uh, I think unrealistically low. I think that maybe there's something going on with your efficiency with your power meter. Maybe this is actually an overestimate of your exercise calories.
Mhm,
Or maybe the thermic effective food is an overestimate. The BMR should be quite accurate.
mhm,
But I would imagine that your NEAT would be a bit higher than that.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
either way, it's kind of, this is still, however you want to allot this is still kind of the amount of calories that I'm burning. So I would venture to say
exactly.
maybe, I think my power meter data is probably pretty accurate. So maybe it was thermic effective food because I wouldn't say I eat like a crazy amount of protein. So,
Yeah,
um,
that could be it. And I mean, I think my takeaway here is whatever NEAT is in actuality, you're quite efficient, I would say, like with your allocation of your spending, right? So you're not
mhm,
spending your paycheck on a bunch of like frivolous stuff. I've seen NEATs as high as like 1,400 calories, which is like, okay, that's a lot of low hanging fruit. For you, it looks like you're doing a great job of like really prioritizing your training and your recovery. So this is a good kind of takeaway. And then we look at your fueling a little more closely with energy availability, and you're in the optimal setting.
mhm.
So that's also good. Given that you are at around the 2.5 number, we really want to check and make sure that you're fueling correctly for that, for the amount of training that you're doing, the amount of exercise that you're doing.
Right. And that's basically, that measure is basically kind of making sure that I have enough energy to stay healthy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you're doing a really good job there. You could imagine a scenario, let's pick a hypothetical scenario where somebody has a physical activity level of 2, so they're not burning an excessive amount. They're not at their limit, but they're still under fueling. Like
Mhm.
you could imagine you could still be under eating even if your physical activity level is totally sustainable. And so that's why we want to hit it from both angles. We want to hit it from the energy burn side, and we want to hit it from the eating side.
Right.
Training
Yeah.
sustainability, you're right there. We already knew 2.47, so you're pretty much right near your limit. If you were
Mhm.
over your limit, we would also report, how many calories you would need to drop by to get sustainable and how many days you could sustain that activity level.
Right. Yeah, and even this kind of brings up the idea of at times I could go over this limit provided that I recover. So maybe I have a week of really hard training, but then I replace that on a rest week the week after.
Yeah, I remember you bringing this up earlier, and it's something that I do. I did in my running career, and I'm actually coaching my nephew as well. And we do something similar, 3 build weeks and then one kind of consolidation week.
Mhm.
I think that there's a lot of logic to that. We haven't yet tested athletes in a build and a rest week to actually do the math on that budget, but I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure that's what's going on. Maybe there's 3 weeks at a 2.8 and then 1 week at a 2.2, and it all
Mhm.
evens out.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting in terms of that's typically the traditional periodization for cycling in particular is we usually do 3 weeks on, 1 week off during training blocks. And typically we find at the end of that third week, guys start to get tired and it's like, okay, we need to drop it down a little bit and recover. And I think that this perfectly explains the reason for that. And as you've said before, maybe this is more related to our ability to fuel and absorb nutrients than what we originally thought. And kind of bouncing off of that, that also explains what happens to me, and I'm sure what happens to many other people is after a hard training block on that rest week, you're usually really hungry, even though you're not
Yeah.
doing much. And I think it's kind of your body's trying to compensate for going above that limit, regardless of how your fueling was.
Yeah, I did a stretch on the Arizona Trail recently. I was doing like 35 to 37 miles a day of hiking and carrying a pack. And yeah, I mean, noticeably hungrier the next week. It's you know, your body figures it out.
Right.
We've got your body composition. Like I said, this is as accurate as a DEXA scan or underwater weighing or the bod pod or any of that. It's just in an at-home environment, which is really nice and convenient. And it comes along with your doubly labeled water measurement. So you get this paired measurement of your metabolism alongside your body composition. It's really nice. And then the last set of measurements we have are related to hydration. So we can tell how much water is going through your body each day. That's not just drinking water. That's also the water content of the food you eat. And it's also the water produced by your metabolism as a waste product. So you burn fuel with oxygen, you release CO2, and you also release water. So it's all of those combined. And then your total body water. So 67% of your body weight is water. And that's a high number because you're so lean. So the water goes into your lean tissues. It doesn't go into your fat tissues. And then finally, here's how you stack up to the meta-analysis in the literature done by our scientific advisor, Herman Poncer at Duke. And you can see you're above the mean substantially. That's due to your activity level. That's essentially your activity level right there. But you can see that there are people that are way, way, way higher that have been measured during crazy weeks. Also important to note about this black line is what your watch is going to tell you. Your Whoop strap, Oura ring, Apple Watch, any of that stuff, your Garmin. It's going to tell you your age, height, weight, and sex, and it's going to run this regression through this line. And that's fine if you're average, but you know, I would imagine that your audience just by definition isn't average. And so it's going to require you to guess your activity level, which is kind of the whole point of our test, that you don't have to guess that. So if you're taking an athlete and guessing their activity level, then what are you really doing? You're back to just logging miles or TSS or whatever it is. And those are useful tools, but they're not the same thing as actually measuring your energy budget. They're other proxies for how much training you're doing.
Totally. And I think this test offers so much value. I've had athletes who have expressed interest or have actually gotten a DEXA scan at a university or something and paid a lot of money for it, but that doesn't give you the other piece of what you're doing throughout the day. So, oh, you can know your resting metabolic rate. You can also, from your power meter data, know approximately how many calories you're burning through training. But as I learned, I was burning more calories away from my training than what I thought by measure of like 500 calories.
Right.
And so just being aware of that, I think, is huge in getting those personalized results. I
Yeah.
think this is such a worthwhile investment and something that's so easy that could make dividends for somebody's training for the rest of their life, really, just knowing this.
There really is a lot of value there. If you had to go out and get all these other tests individually, if you had to get a resting metabolic rate test and a DEXA scan and a food scale and a calorie counting pro app and all this stuff, it really would add up over time. And you're still not going to get any accuracy with the calories at all because there is no other measurement. So even if you go into a lab and you get a resting metabolic rate, so you lie on a table, you breathe into a mask, same mask as a VO2 max test. That will very, very accurately measure how many calories you're burning at baseline for those 15 minutes. The problem is you have to multiply it by a guess of your activity level. So you take a great, great, great lab measurement and you multiply it by a guess. We work kind of top down. So we measure the total and then we kind of deconstruct it really accurately from there. So that's really the difference that you get with doubly labeled water. I'll be completely honest, it's expensive. We're launching on Friday this 2-tiered offering that I mentioned, the Calorify and Calorify Pro. Calorify is $795, $695 for your people with your code EVOQ. $995 is Pro, so $895 for them. But it would be hundreds of dollars for the equivalent testing, and it would be inferior. And some of it there just simply is no parallel for it. we really are kind of like the Tesla Roadster of metabolic tests right now. And we are building the Model 3. We want to make this something that is standard. We want to make this something that a doctor would give you in part of your annual physical. We want to make physical activity level as conversational as blood pressure or heart rate or what your VO2 max is or what your watts per kilo is. We want to make people really feel like, oh, that's what it means to be in a 500 calorie deficit, or that's what it feels like when I have a 2.8 training week. I think we're en route to that in the same way that people know what a CTL of 80 means. I think we're just really at the tip of that, and I think that we will have $100 test in the future. It's just going to take time, and it's going to take early adopters coming on board, believing in it, and proving the value of it. And that's why I think we're really focusing on sports as one of our kind of target go-to-market areas, is just because people really do need the accuracy. They really do need this level of performance, as opposed to just the random person off the street that is trying to just lose weight.
Right. And I mean, I think it is an investment, but I think it's so worth it when you understand just how important your nutrition can be for performance. I know I've read articles and a lot of anecdotes of kind of some of the performance increases that we've seen in the world tour. And just that it's become way more competitive. And a lot of people have said it's because we've got the nutrition figured out. We weren't fueling enough, and now we know 120 grams of carbs per hour during riding can enhance your performance, and all of
Yeah,
these things that we used to not know that are so important for improving your performance.
yeah,
And I would say getting your nutrition dialed is going to make you way faster than getting a new set of wheels. And I've experienced this because I messed
yeah.
up my nutrition for so long, and so I know firsthand how big of a difference it actually makes.
Yeah, and it's just, again, like, people think about just one siloed aspect of it, but there's so much more to it. I mean, what if you didn't get sick for the next 2 years? What would that do to your performance? What if you just could avoid one of these overtraining syndromes like Red S? That could give you a year back of your career. For me, in my athletic career, it was all about consistency. And when I was consistent, my progression was unbelievable. And then I had a lot of times when I wasn't consistent. I dealt with an autoimmune disease that caused inflammation in my back, and I would have these flare-ups, and I just wouldn't be able to put in the base volume that I needed to be healthy through a season. And that was it. That was the end of my running career after 3 years of kind of managing those symptoms. So it really does come down to a lot of this stuff. And, now looking back on it, 15 years later, 20 years later, whatever, like, maybe there was a metabolic component to why the autoimmune disease affected my training so much. Maybe I was burning a ton of calories elsewhere and my recovery was terrible. So it's kind of an interesting thought, and I think we're just really at the tip of the iceberg here. But yeah, don't underestimate. It's not just about, like you said, the wheel set. It's like, what if you could have uninterrupted training for a multi-year period? Like,
Totally.
oh, that's serious. And like, no shortcuts. Same thing. What if you did improve your body composition steadily over 12 months or 18 months, as opposed to just tried to achieve it all in a month and you get injured or sick?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I know we didn't get to all the questions, but we might have to do another podcast or try to get
Yeah.
Herman on here next, because I know I have a lot of other comments and questions about how we could even apply this to our training more specifically. But yeah, it was great to have you on, and thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, well, thank you. And let's keep the conversation going. I'm here to answer any and all questions. You can shoot me a note anytime, Hari, Hari, at calorify.com. And yeah, check us out at calorify.com. We're happy to answer any questions, work with you. We really love working with people in the endurance community.
All right. Thanks, Ari.
Yep. Thank you. Take care.